and to Dale Norton, our Director of Sales, for their efforts in getting this program set up. We are very fortunate today to have with us three of our key supplier partners to present and to answer your questions. They are Mark Love, Regional Account Manager for Chemours Refrigerants, Alan Byers, Regional Sales Manager for the Refrigeration Aftermarket Division of Emerson, and Sajad Khan, Senior Manager for Engineering at Heatcraft Refrigeration Products. Collectively, these gentlemen have almost a century of refrigeration industry experience. Before we get started, please understand that SNAP 2021 regulations are a rapidly evolving issue. Meyer Supply and our industry partners have tried to interpret all of this and predict how this will play out to the best of our ability. We cannot guarantee the exactness of all information as it is changing. So without further ado, let's get started. Our first presenter today is Mark Love with Chemours. And Mark, if you can, please take it away.
Thank you. So I'm going to spend the next about 12 minutes or so starting with an overview and then getting down into some of the specifics around the changing U.S. refrigerant regulations. So with that, I'm going to start stepping into it. You can go to the next slide. So in general, when you look at the refrigerant market, it is driven by regulatory action. Always has been, and in the future sort of always will. There are two main regulatory drivers that drive the refrigerant segment. The first on the right is the ozone depletion. This is what we know as the Montreal Protocol, and this dealt with a very singular focus, which was reducing the thinning or the hole in the ozone layer. So that took place in the early 90s. That was the ban on CFCs, and then the final phase out of the HCFCs like R22, which was completed last year. So in essence, that Montreal Protocol, that phase out is now complete. There's obviously has not been production of CFCs and for 25 years. And then as of the end of 2019, no more production of R22. There's still R22 being sold, but that was all produced prior to December 31st, 2019. There's still, and the only other 22 that would be available would then be through reclaim. Okay. What we're going to talk about over the next 10 minutes is the regulations that are coming in now that deal with climate change, global warming, and in specific CO2 emissions, and how, as not only a country, but this has a global impact globally, do we address this issue? These regulations that are coming in now to address climate change and CO2 emissions will be ushering in a new set of not only refrigerant, but technology as well to address lower carbon footprint solutions. And over the next sort of 10 to 12 years, that's completely the name of the game, which is how do we continue to supply refrigeration and air conditioning while lowering the carbon footprint. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide. So sort of in response to the regulatory actions through the years, just sort of a quick summary, in the 20s, there was just sort of industrial chemicals like methyl chloride, ammonia, CO2. The brands that we know like 22, 12, 502 were ushered in the 30s and 50s. In the 90s, when we got the regulations around the Montreal Protocol. That ushered in an era of no ozone depletion, which is 134A, 404A, 507, 410A. Well, fast forward now 30 years in 2020, we're going through, we're in the beginning phases of something similar to what we did in the early 90s, but now the regulatory driver is low carbon footprint. So what you're now going to see are products that have zero ozone depletion, but also must have low GWP or low carbon footprint. So every solution going forward still must be zero ozone depletion, but they also now must be low carbon footprint. No solution will proceed unless it addresses those two constraints. Okay. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So how is this being combated, and how are we going to start to feel and experience these regulations? Well, in terms of the regulations, you're going to see them, and they're going to come in on 3 levels. The first one is the international level. We'll talk about what's happening globally. The second one is at a federal level. We'll talk about what is currently going on at a federal level. And then the third is specific state levels. And in general, what you'll be seeing is at the international and federal level, a broad approach, as you would expect. And then when it gets down to the state level, it gets much more specific in terms of what can and can't be done. Okay. So we'll go to the next slide. So one of the big items you will hear about, if you haven't already, you will continue to hear about, is what's called the Kigali Amendment. This is, you can think about it in terms of, it is very similar, but not identical. It is similar in scope to the Montreal Protocol, which is, this is a global agreement to phase down, not completely phase out, but phase down HFCs. You can look over about a 25-year period. And in general, the agreement says for developed countries like the US, Europe, Asia, they will go at a faster rate than developing countries. Okay? But in short, what it means is there will be benchmarks over the next 25 years that countries have to meet in terms of HFC usage. So you can see here, the first one for developing countries comes in 2024, right? So you will start to see, and that's why you're starting to see action now in terms of phasing down, and I'm using the word phasing down versus phasing out, phasing down HFC use. You're going to start to see that pick up with some of the state regulations and federal regulations in order to meet this 2024 deadline. So there's a deadline at 2024, and then there's a second deadline in this 2029, 2030 area. So we'll see 2 step downs over the next decade. Okay. So this is an agreement, once again, that is a global agreement that developed countries will be moving first and faster. They also happen to be the largest consumers of HFCs, and then the developing countries will be following. Okay, next slide. Just a little quicker. So at the federal level, you will see that's working through Congress now. It's called the AIM Act. And in essence, what the AIM Act is designed to do, this is also a phase down, but this is specific to the U.S. It's a bipartisan bill that was sponsored by a Republican and a Democratic senator. We believe that sometime in 2021, this will be passed. And what this will do is it will start us getting down a path where the HFCs get phased out. And if we just follow the AIM Act, we actually really don't have to worry about Kigali. We'll meet the Kigali global agreements by following the U.S. AIM Act. Okay? We're going to get to the next one. Next slide. So, Kigali, very broad. AIM Act, still quite broad. When we get down to the state level, at the state level, there is an organization called the U.S. Climate Alliance. The members of the Climate Alliance are all shaded in blue. Okay? The ones in dark blue, and we'll talk about those on the next slide, these are states that have already passed HFC phase down regulations. The light blues have legislation that's proposed. So right now, all action that's being done in terms of regulatory action is being done at the state level, right? The AIM Act, once it gets implemented, but this is still about a year or so away, we'll have further action. But right now, all the regulatory action, the new regulatory action is at a state level. And the ones in the dark blue have implemented. We'll take a look at what that is. We'll go to the next slide. So if you look here, so what have these states done? They have adopted what's called SNAP 20 and SNAP 21. In essence, and just sort of to summarize and give you sort of a thumbnail overview of what SNAP 20 and 21 is, it's basically saying no longer using 404 and 507 in refrigeration for new equipment and retrofits. So if you look here, the states that have passed it: California, New Jersey, Vermont, Washington State, New York, and Colorado. In New Jersey, it was effective in July 1st, 2020. The state of New York, effective this January, 404A will be discontinued for use in new and retrofit applications. So once again, it is not a ban on 404A, but it is a discontinue use of 404A in new equipment. Existing equipment will be allowed to be serviced with 404A, but no new equipment. So part of the phase down of these high global warming products will occur just by the fact that we're not installing them using the HFCs anymore. You can see Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, Oregon, Hawaii, Maine. They're working its way through. So we expect in 2021 these states will join the ones on the left, and then the other handful, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, are in the earlier stages. So you can see right now there's a half dozen states that have now stopped the use of 404A and 507 in new and retrofits. There's another half dozen that will be doing so in short order. As you can tell, most of those states are states that you guys do work in, right? So this is definitely going to be impacting you when it comes to a choice of equipment and what type of refrigerant for new installations and for retrofits. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll just quickly go over that in terms of where we see things going over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Okay, California gives a great snapshot. If you want to look at sort of where the world is going, look at what's happening over in Europe, look at what's happening in California, and that pretty much tells you where we're going to be in about 5 to 7 years. California, with their California Air Resources Board, they have a proposal, and we believe over the next, I think, 2 to 3 months, it's going to be finalized, that by 2030, their retailer for supermarkets, they have to have an average GWP limit of 1,400. Okay, to ground everybody, 404A has a GWP limit of 3,800. things like the 407s, whether it be 407A or 407C, they're around 2200. So you can't get there with any of the HFCs. Okay. But what the state of California is doing, which I think is very smart, and this was sort of feedback that they got from the supermarkets themselves, said, don't tell us what we have to put in. You give us the target, we'll meet it. And we'll go to the next slide, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you look here on the left, you've got 404 and 507. This is what they're looking at in California. And I think what we're going to be seeing, not short term, but probably in the next sort of 5 to 7 years. What they're saying in California is, here's 404, 507, almost about 4,000. You have on the far right, you have the hydrofluoroolefins, these low GWP compounds that are below 1,400. Basically, what the California law says, or will say, is by the end of 2030, your store has to have an average GWP of 1,400. Well, so what that means is these guys on the left, there's no way you can get there with 404 and 507. They've got to take that out and retrofit. However, if you have stores that are, say, running on 407A or 407C, you could keep those if you have part of your store running on, say, XP10 or XP40, as long as the average of the total charge is below 1,400, then you're good. So what you're going to see fairly quickly in the state of California is pretty much all the 404 and 507 being converted over to the HFOs. And now they've also given the state of California, they've worked it out where that has to happen over a 10-year period. There is a check at 2025 to make sure folks aren't putting it off to the last minute. But in essence, they've really empowered the supermarkets to say, we're just going to set the goal. You, as the store, will determine your best path to get there. It could be a combination of HFCs and HFOs. You could put CO2 in. Whatever combination you want, we're not going to tell you what to use. We're just going to tell you what the goal is. And I think in general, once they've worked that out, the supermarkets, the end users, and the state of California all agree they think this is workable. I believe, and our view is, we will see things similar to this, not over the next year, 2, 3, but I think as we get out to the next sort of 5, 6 years, we're going to start to see that where we believe other states will be adopting this model, because it's a model that once again, empowers the supermarkets, but allows folks to do it, make their own decisions around reaching predetermined goals. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so quick summary, then I will turn it over to the next speaker. Is current state, the regulatory work, all done at the state level. Basically what you're going to see, certainly in New York and New Jersey, no 404A, 507 in new equipment. In the next 3 to 5 years, that's when you're going to start to see the AIM Act at a federal level will start to drive 404, 507, and probably some of the other HFCs start to phase that down as we get close to meeting the Kigali step down. We will also see over the next 3 to 5 years, part of this HFC phase down will be a 410A replacement. You will start to see that in the 2023-2024 timeframe. 5 to 10 years out, the HFOs, these low carbon footprint refrigerants, will be the predominant refrigerant. And in essence, what really you're going to experience is these HFCs, 404A, 507, 407A, even to a certain degree 410A, they're going to be giving way to the HFOs, your 449As, your 513As. But that's sort of 5 to 10 years down the road, okay? So short term, the state level, no 404A, 507, for new and existing, or new and retrofit. That's going to hit you now and into 2021. The rest of the transition is going to start in sort of the next 3 to 5 years. You can go to the next one. I think that might be the last chart. Oh, in terms of resources, if you're interested, we've got our website that you can just go there and register, and that you'll get. I think we have a quarterly newsletter. On the right, we'll put this as part of our post-webinar mailer. We have a weekly series, Check Up with Dr. Chuck. Like 5-10 minute YouTube videos on everything soup to nuts in terms of not just refrigerants, but refrigeration and refrigeration systems. They're very quick, easy, nice little YouTube series narrated by Dr. Chuck Allgood. So we'll include this in the mailer, but just wanted to make you aware of these sort of easy to access resources. You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well done. So Mark, the first presentation is from a refrigerant manufacturer, and we thought that it made sense to then have a presentation from a compressor manufacturing perspective, and that will be Alan Byers with Emerson and Copeland. And Alan, you have the stage. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And thanks to the whole team for putting this together, for everybody jumping on board. So some of my slides will be some redundancy with what Mark had, and I think that's important just from a different perspective, as Mike just said, from a component manufacturer perspective, and what it means to kind of us and to our customers, you and the others that are out there. So I will time those, but these charts will look similar. You're going to get this whole slide deck at the end of the presentation, so you'll be able to review these at some point. They'll send this all out. So go ahead to the next slide. So this one is very similar to the one Mark showed earlier, and I just want to mainly focus on that blue line, the A2 countries, U.S. and Canada, and it shows that phase down. We're in that time frame right now between 2019 and 2024, and 2024 will drop down to 60% of that GWB weighted capacity of usage in the whole country. So then that's basically a poundage times the GWP gives you that weighting score, and we'll be reducing the amount of that refrigerant into the market. And this is an ever-changing landscape. So the picture of it today might look different in 6 months as they move dates around, forward, in some cases backward, depending on what country you're talking about. But the whole globe is dealing with this. So from a manufacturing issue, decisions are being made, even if it's not affecting necessarily New York or Pennsylvania, where most of you folks are at. It's being driven by what's happening in Europe and China and all over the world, not just in your market. So that's why some of these decisions may not make sense for you personally, but they're being driven by a whole global initiative. Go ahead to the next slide. So, and Mark covered this very well. I don't have a lot to add there. This is just kind of, again, another way to look at it. So, the SNAP policy evaluates what's acceptable substitutions. In 2017, the federal courts, vacated the SNAP rules. So we haven't been under that restricted yet, but that day's coming. And we all knew it was coming at some point. It's just a matter of when it's going to be implemented. And that, as Mark brought up, it likely will be in 2021. A lot of these new delistings will happen. And you can go to the next slide. So another way to talk about the AIM Act, the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, again, bipartisan. The issue we've had with the Climate Alliance, and that's the next slide I have, is that it's erratic. So you have California with one set of rules, Nevada with a proposed another set of rules, slightly maybe different and a different time frame, different dates, and then Arizona right next to them with a completely different set of rules or a lack of rules. So from a manufacturer's perspective, how do you make products for all three of those markets that have to maintain different criteria? It's very difficult. So the more federal regulation, I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but the more federal regulation that we have in this standpoint, it's better because it's consistent across the whole country rather than having these, and I'll use the term piecemeal, but these state by state regulations that makes it difficult to develop products. When we develop a compressor, we want it to work in Arizona as well as Maine, as well as New York, as well as Washington and Florida. So it's got to work in all those different climates and atmospheres. And if the regulations are different, that just creates complexity beyond belief. So this is a good thing and has support, like the top right of this slide shows, has support of all these different entities that are out there, along with plenty of manufacturers. And after I speak, it will be Sajad from Heatcraft, and I'm sure they're in line with this as well. So he can speak to that when his slide decks come up. But we're looking at this as being, like I said, a good thing for the whole country and how we can manufacture products that can work everywhere. Go to the next slide, please. So again, the Climate Alliance that Mark spoke about, I don't have it broken down because, but Mark, I like actually his slides better because he has the ones that have already been enacted and then ones that are still in the legislative state. But all these states have signed up for the U.S. Climate Alliance, and some of that was to make the federal government take action, and it worked. They did. They're taking this AIM action. So in a way, it has been effective into getting something done on a federal level rather than having all the states having different rules. So if you're in New York and you're in Binghamton and you had work in Wilkes-Barre right across the border, there would be a different regulation across that state line. So very difficult to work under those kind of restrictions and understanding the differences between both and all those nuances. So just make that point. Okay, next slide. Very busy slide here. Not going to cover it a lot, but this is how complex it can be. So you see this top line, 404A and 507, and it has the GWP ratings there, 3900 and 3985, correct? And then you see all these different dates. California, Washington, New York, and Vermont is the letter code, CWNV, and then different dates of implementation based on what kind of equipment it is. So extremely confusing. Supermarkets, remote condensing units, standalone units, ice machines, which is highlighted here, which, that just happened to be the slide we're using for this presentation. Cold storage, all have different implementation dates. Some of them are very similar, but in other refrigerants, they do change based on their global warming potential and all that we've talked about already. So can be very confusing, very labor intensive for contractors and wholesalers and manufacturers. So the more we can get of this pulled together and have it nationwide, the better off we'll be. Next slide, please. So this slide, and again, I'm not going to go through each one of these. We only have an hour for this presentation, but you could see here where those different GWP levels that we're talking about in that middle column, in different applications, you have to have different levels of lower than 750, lower than 1500, lower than 150 on that bottom one with stationary refrigeration, refrigerant charges greater than 50 pounds. So that puts a lot of restriction on what we can do from a setup and manufacturing process for launching new products as they come out. Again, you'll get this slide, you can kind of pour through it, and we're going to give you also links that you can go and view different things to help explain some of these details if you want to get that deep into it. Next slide, please. So these are charts that Emerson has used for a few years now, and it can be a little bit confusing when you first look at it, but if you break it down, it actually makes a lot of sense. So on the top part, you see the A1s, which are non-flammable, are all the green bars. So anything in green is non-flammable. The A2s are mildly flammable, which means it will ignite, but it won't hold the flame, basically, in a layman's terms. A3 is flammable, and then toxic would be your orange color. And you could see NH3 on that right column in the middle is toxic. That's ammonia. You see right next to it, R290 in red. That's flammable. Then you have your pinks, which are mildly flammable, which are all the ones that get kind of this lower range. And the scale along the bottom is your global warming potential. So you could see 500, and it's kind of a little bit hidden, but 500, 1,000, 1,500, and then R404A way off to the right, off the scale at 3,900 roughly global warming potential. So we're trying to move all of the refrigerants to the left. And there was initially a talk about a 650 global warming potential level. That has been somewhat adjusted to 750, as you noticed on the previous chart. So that's that line, that gray line kind of down the middle that shows everything to the left of that is below the 750 line. The ultimate goal is to get below the 150 line, which is that next gray bar to your left. And that's where a lot of those pink colored mildly flammable refrigerants come into play, and also the natural refrigerants, the CO2s, the propanes, those type of refrigerants that are what internally we like to call kind of the end game refrigerants. The end users that get to that level will likely not have to deal with refrigerant changes in their, in their lifetime. No promises there, because who knows what the next regulations might be. But when you get to that natural refrigerant, which has no ozone depletion, no global warming, you have no real issues there other than some upfront cost or flammabilities or those type of issues, or in the ammonia side, toxicity. So there are other issues there, but not in the DOE or EPA's vision. You can go ahead to the next slide. So this lists all the refrigerants again in a little different format. So the bottom part of this chart shows the R134A like refrigerants, still the same color codes, green, pink for mildly flammable, and red for flammable. And then to the left, you see the replacement. So the R513s, XP10 that Mark talked about is in there. And then there's more down the road. The YFs that are on the end, that's those HFOs that Mark also spoke about. The 1, 2, 3, 4s, YFs and ZEs, very low global warming potential, no ozone depletion potential. But you can see here from a capacity standpoint, we start to run into some issues. So 134A is along that 100% line on the left side of the chart. As you get into some of these other refrigerants, you lose some capacity. So for an example, 471A, the bottom one in the green, very low from a global warming potential, below 150, but from a capacity standpoint, only around 70%, 65 to 70% of the capacity. So you need bigger motors, bigger compressors, things like that to do the same amount of work that you would from the refrigerant standpoint, boiling and condensing, boiling and condensing like we do in refrigeration. So not undoable, but just changes the dynamics. And all these, we look at that from all these different refrigerants when we test them. It's not just testing them to see if they work, it's how do they work? Do we need more, more capacity then to make these refrigerants work in the industry? So go ahead to the next slide. And you can go to the next slide, sorry. There's an extra slide in there. So this chart is really showing what Emerson views as our perspective and development plan. And Mike Nolly made a great point at the beginning of this. Take all this with a grain of salt, because things change constantly. And some of this is, our interpretation of how the law is written. And we're constantly going back to both the EPA and the DOE and asking them to, give us a clearer interpretation of how the law is written. So all these things can change, but this is where we're at today. So some of these replacements that we're talking about, these are things that we have tested or are still in testing to develop them being used in our components, and then eventually into the equipment that the folks like Heatcraft build. So you'll get all this information, and you can they're not ranked in any kind of order. You can see they're put in there from a global warming perspective. So that HFO 1, 2, 3, 4 YF is less than 1. Same with the ZE, so very low, and that's why we rank them that way, but they're not ranked in any other way as far as capacity or preferred replacement, which allows those end users, to Mark Love's point, to make their own decisions on which way they want to go. And they're going to use the influencers like yourself, contractors and wholesalers and component manufacturers like us. They're going to come to us a lot of times and ask us for our opinions of what direction they should consider going. So while they'll be making the ultimate decision, I think they can be greatly influenced the more you know about this, and to be able to steer those customers in the way that makes sense for both you and them. Go ahead to the next slide. So we'll get into the equipment real quick. I only think I have a couple slides left. So these are, when we change equipment, we need to not only, in some cases, change compressors, but we need to change things for SNAP, for the EPA regulations, the DOE regulations, and we didn't even get into the AWEF, annual walk-in energy factor regulations that are now in place. So all these triggers are put in. So condensers have gotten larger, more fins per inch. In some cases, micro channel, just to get more surface area. ECM motors, which a lot of you are already seeing those in a lot of cases, but we're putting them into condensing units now to help us hit different regulations that are out there. And then just change of the actual equipment, putting different shrouds in place so the airflow movement across is better, and things like that. So a lot of different design builds to happen to help us hit all these different regulations. And I'll just make one more quick point. While we have DOE regulations and EPA regulations, those two agencies don't talk to each other and don't really care what each other's doing. So the EPA says you can't use these refrigerants because of global warming or climate ozone depletion or for whatever reason. And the DOE at the same time is saying, yes, but we need to make our stuff more efficient because we don't have the power grid to be able to run things, and we need more efficiency out of everything. And sometimes those don't mix. Like we showed, that the different refrigerants can be less efficient to run. So very difficult to work through all those kind of components of everything and work it out. But it is a little frustrating when you walk into one office of the DOE and they say, XYZ, and then you walk into the EPA and they say, oh no, ABC is what we need to worry about. So very complex. All right, next slide. So I did want to talk about this real quick. So refrigerants do change the capacity like we showed you. So in this case, let's look at 404A line. So if we're looking at it would be a cooler at 90-degree ambient, 25-degree coil temperature with 404A, and this FFPA 2-horsepower unit with a Scroll ZS compressor on it will give you 15,700 BTUs at the conditions listed. 5-degree subcooling, blah, blah, blah. If you change that refrigerant to 407C, you can expect to get 14,300 BTUs. Now that's usually a rule of thumb is, within 10%, because most equipment is, oversized enough to allow that kind of capacity drop. But that's right close to that range of 10%, 15,007 down to 14,3. You're inside of it, but it's close. And if you had a system that was, already overmaxed or undersized, that change in refrigerant would just cause you more issues. If you went to 134A or one of its substitutes down the road, you can see that BTU there is way below what you would get from a different refrigerant at that set point. So just keep that in mind. In some ways, we can hit capacity loads by selecting the refrigerant. So, you can use a smaller unit or a larger unit and change the refrigerant and hit the load capacity that you need. So keep that in mind with a lot of our equipment, because most of our Scroll compressors, which where the world is mostly at nowadays, are capable of using multiple refrigerants. That's as listed here, the 448s, the 449s. This has not been updated for the 513s yet, but it will be. I just want to kind of make that point. So just because you can change a refrigerant, realize that you may have some impacts that you need to be aware of from a capacity standpoint. And you also may need to make changes to your TXV valves and such if you do change refrigerants. Not always, many times you won't, but you may have to change distributors, and you may have to change TXV valve settings or change the whole valve out itself. Next slide, please. This slide, real quick, a lot of when we get into low temp applications on our Scrolls, we're now injecting them to help protect them and also to give us more energy efficiency. On the left, that's a reciprocating CF model compressor, and you can see with 407A, you can only run it in that yellow portion of the envelope. So if you get above those temperatures on the left, and I realize it's an eye chart here, but as those condensing temperatures on the left go up, it starts at 90 and goes up to 150. Anything above 90 degrees, you can't run that CF compressor with 407A. And as your evaporator temperature changes on the bottom, you can't run it either. So very restrictive on reciprocating compressors. Whereas with scrolls, since we can inject them with liquid refrigerant right into the scroll to keep them cold, we can run that in a wide envelope. So again, that's why scrolls are much more preferred as we move into this, dynamic world that's coming with all these refrigerant changes. Go ahead to the next slide. I think this is my last slide. So this is the discus envelopes. So these are discus compressors that are used in mostly supermarket rack manufacturers now. There's other applications, but that's mostly where you see them. And you can see without demand cooling, which is an internal way of keeping that compressor cool, you cannot run those 448s and 449s above a certain set point without having restrictions set in there for maximum compressor superheats and return gas temperatures. So you're restricted, and a lot of guys don't think of that stuff. They just set the set points and walk away, and this is when you start having premature failures with compressors, when you're not aware that the compressor should be running outside that envelope. Every compressor we make has an envelope like this, and you can find those online. We'll send out information where you can look at that and see if your compressor is running outside its envelope at the conditions you have set. On the right, we can inject with demand cooling, and we're fine. We can run a full envelope without any issues with being able to inject it, but you have to have the compressor that's capable of doing that. Next slide. I think that was my last one. Yes, thank you.
Alan, thank you so much. And so now we have heard from the compressor component manufacturer. And next we're going to hear from an equipment and systems manufacturer. So Sajad with Heatcraft Refrigeration Products, if you can take it from here, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So before I even begin, some of what I'm going to present is going to be almost similar to what Mark and Alan has already presented. So I'll try to fast forward or skip some of that. But in any case, I am going to present Heatcraft's perspective or look at the regulatory landscape. But before I even begin, I need to put a disclaimer that, as I think Alan also stated, that this regulatory landscape changes almost daily, weekly. So everything that I have to present is as we see it today, but it will change for sure. So please keep in mind that what you see today may not be what you will actually have to do as we move forward. Okay, yep, next slide, please. So I'm really going to cover a couple of things today. I will talk a little bit about AOF, as Alan had mentioned, because as an equipment manufacturer, we have to deal with this. And then I will also cover some of the global warming potential and its effect on refrigerants and as how we see it. Next slide, please. So U.S. Department of Energy, regulates efficiency under the EPCA, Energy Act of 1975. So we just, in this 2020, for the first time, walk-in cooler efficiency went into effect. So that's behind us. We have developed equipment to meet those requirements, and we launched those in 2020. So next slide. So we're looking forward, what's going to happen next? So we feel that DOE is probably going to have new standards for WICF by 2023. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, what the numbers would be. That remains to be seen. We anticipate that DOE will probably give us about 3 years. Whenever they come out with the regulation, they will probably give us at least 3 years. But we're trying to through AHRI, we talk to DOE. We are trying to ask them to maintain a 6-year cycle, so that gives us some stability. So it's more likely that between 24 and 26, DOE will implement a new regulation. For the near future, we feel that DOE will focus on what we just did for WCIF, stabilize that, and then the enforcement of that, which they have not really done because of COVID. They're kind of let it stabilize a little bit before they enforce those regulations. And then for Canada, Natural Resource Canada actually follows DOE just like they did the last AOF compliance piece, with one added caveat. Canada does require, NRCan does require a third-party certification of our equipment, which DOE does not. Next slide, please. So as a timeline, what we see is that next batch of DOE efficiency requirements coming and being implemented somewhere between 2024 and 2026. Next. Then I will touch on GWP, global warming potential. Next slide, please. So as other presenters have talked about, EPA, SNAP, Climate Alliance states, and then CARB. These are the entities that we monitor very closely, work with through AHRI very closely as well. Next slide, please. So SNAP, I'm not going to really go into 2021 because SNAP 2021 because I believe that was well covered by Mark and Alan. But in a nutshell, this is where, although it was vacated, but this is what it was supposed to have done. Basically, what you see in this slide is 404A, 507A going away for food service new installation and retrofit installation, and for chillers and cold storage, it's additional refrigerants were going to go away. Now, it hasn't been implemented nationally, but some states are moving forward, and that's what we will be talking about next. Next slide, please. So this is what's coming from EPA, SNAP 23. EPA in May did publish SNAP 23. And then there was a 45-day commenting period which ended in July. But since then, EPA has been very quiet. Hasn't said anything, most likely because of the election, and then now the administration changing, so they're probably regrouping. But we have been working through AHRI to propose, make some proposals, national proposals. So that's what you see as a draft national proposal, which is a 2-step phase in if we can make it happen. So step 1 is for till 2022, stay as is. This is where we are today. As you can see, the numbers of the GWP limits, for different types of equipment. What are the limits? So stay like that till 2022, and then phase down to 150 is what's coming, right? That's how we would like to approach. Next slide, please. So we feel that if that were to be implemented, then step 2, which is the less than 150 GWP, will fall in between beginning of 2023 and end of 2025, somewhere thereabouts. Next. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is well covered by the other 2 presenters, but there are about 25 states, I believe, in the U.S. Climate Alliance. But as I think Mark and Alan both said, they're so disjointed. We don't have clear alignment between the states, and a lot of the states have not really finalized their adoption dates. Some have, some haven't. So next slide. So this is our view of some of the states when they are adopting 2021. Even though SNAP 2021 was vacated by the courts, these states are going ahead with the implementation of eliminating those refrigerants. As you can see, California is well underway. They have already done that for some of the market segments and the products in 2029 and 2020. And some of these other states that I believe Mark talked about are following suit in 2020 and so on and so forth. So this is a kind of a view of when the SNAP 2021 adoption will take place in these states. Next. And then we also have to kind of monitor the states, what they're doing, what is their charter. As you can see, California has a charter that says 40% reduction of HFC from a baseline of 2013 by 2030. And each state has their own HFC phase down charters, and those other SNAP 2020 adoption, 2021 adoption dates and requirements are also varied. It is extremely difficult right now because of each state has their own requirements. Recently, actually, we were able to, through HRI, talk to CARB, and one of their requirements, labeling requirements, had this name is California in it. I believe they have agreed to take California out. So if they do that, then that same requirement, labeling requirement, can be applied across other states as well. So that's really something we are focused on. I think Mark and had stated that if we had a one uniform standards, it would be much easier to follow for everybody, for everyone, right? Especially manufacturers and installers. Next. So then we have CARB. As Mark, I think, alluded that what happens, first it happens in Europe, then it comes to California, then it gets across to other states. So CARB has this regulation. You can see their regulation in the website that I've shown here. Basically, what CARB is going to implement, by the way, they have a meeting this next week. Their board meets next week to finally launch this regulation. We've been going back and forth and discussing with CARB through HRI about some of these details, but I think they're going to make a decision this next week on the 16th, I believe. So how does that affect us? It's for new systems, anything with 50-pound charge or higher, by January 21st, 2022, they're going to require any refrigerants less than 150 GWP. For retrofits, that number is 1,500. I'll talk a little bit more about less than 150 in the next couple of slides. For less than 1,500, as you saw in the refrigerant charts that both Mark and Alan presented, we will be left with 448 or 449. You can use those as they have less than 1,400 GWP, but 407 will then be eliminated because it's greater than 1,500. Next. This is a busy chart. This is actually the regulations of CARB. You guys can look it up in the website that I show here. This is about what market sector, different equipment, different, different dates, implementation dates, and so on and so forth. So we take this, and if you go to the next slide, for our own benefit, we put together a chart like this so that we can keep up with this. This is basically our look of those regulations from CARB, and it kind of says, okay, what market segment, what kind of application, what are the charge limits, what are the GWP limits, and what are the implementation dates. So we kind of keep up with this to make sure that we are aligned and we have equipment to support this. Next. So, as I was saying, when less than 150 GWP, we are left with A2Ls or A3s, as the other presenters kind of presented what that means. I'm not going to go into what they mean. I'm just going to talk about what we see as far as implementation of A2Ls and A3s, A2Ls mostly. So, the building codes that will have to be updated with the safety standards. And we feel that by 2024, which is the next round of building code updates that are coming, probably have these safety standards. Now, the safety standards are being worked on by UL, ASHRAE, and AHRI, which is UL 60335-2-89, now has A2L included. And as a matter of fact, this morning, that was published for public comments, 60335-2-89, which now has A2L included in it. So, depending on when the building codes get updated, it'll get implemented throughout the states. But some of the states, as a matter of fact, very recently have stated that they may bypass the update of the building codes and just go straight to the safety standards and implement into their state and local building codes. If they do that, then this timeline will get moved forward. So if we look at the next slide, what we think as a timeline for this less than 150 GWP implementation, A2L refrigerants, for example, will probably happen somewhere between 2023 and end of 2024. I think if you go to the next slide, I believe that was main presentation. I do have some appendix, and if you quickly go to the next couple of slides, these are some of the definitions that we put together from CARB, and then I have a couple more slides. One on our Heatcraft equipment that aligns with this 50-pound limits, what kind of equipment we supply, which has more than 50-pound charge and less than 50-pound charge. And then we also have one slide where we look at the market and see, okay, what kind of refrigerants that we can use in our product to meet these regulations. So as you can see, some of the natural refrigerants, CO2s, propanes, and then low GWP refrigerants, we're looking at HFOs, and as Mark and Alan indicated. I believe that is the end of my slides. Thank you all for listening, and thanks for putting this together. Yes.
Sajjad, thank you very much. I realize that we've gone a little late here, and I apologize for that. Anybody who would like to hang with us for a little bit longer and ask some questions, you are more than welcome to do so. I have a few questions myself. So anyone who'd like to hang out, please do. Just from me to start with, because the SNAP regulations are being implemented in a state-by-state format, who would be the authority for compliance? Do any of you guys know the answer to that?
Yeah, I think Sajjad talked to it. We believe that it's going to fall to the building inspector level.
Mm-hmm.
There will be other entities that will have ability to drive backwards. Opening of new stores and such that drives a lot of attention can be another way. But the building inspectors, and we all know those, right? Some of them are really good and some of them are really bad, and there's everyone in between. So that's where we see this falling as they start to learn that they have the ability to, look at these restrictions and implement the laws that are in place. So that's where we see it. There may be few others that will find, especially the DOE. The DOE has a little different implementation, I think, or enforcement. And Mark and Sajjad, you can chime in as well.
Yeah, so what you said is right. So local jurisdictions will probably have the SNAP implementations and their interpretation of the building codes and so on and so forth. But the DOE enforcement I think it's not clear yet because DOE hasn't really come out, as I stated in one of my slides, that the enforcement is probably going to start next year, and that's when we'll start to see DOE themselves, how they're going to enforce. We have not seen that yet.
And I'll just add one more thing. We didn't talk about AWEF hardly at all. It just didn't have enough time. We could probably do a whole hour on just that. But on the AWEF side, that everyone in the chain is held responsible if there's equipment installed outside of the AWEF regulation. So end user, contractor, wholesaler, component manufacturer, equipment manufacturer, all the way down the line will have a piece of that or have some responsibility in how that equipment got out there in a unauthorized installation. So again, we're not sure how that will be, who's going to do that enforcement, but the whole channel is held up to that enforcement level.
Right. We're all
just to add, DOE does have a website where you can go and turn somebody in, by the way.
Yeah.
Is it www.snitch.com or something like that?
So I sent an email inquiry to the DOE website, and it took them about 2 months to send a reply.
Yeah, they have a database called CCMS database, by the way, where everybody's equipment that complies with this AOF requirements is listed. So anybody can go into that database and look it up.
Great.
Hey, Mike, we've got a question off the chat line.
Yeah, I see the question on the chat window. Can equipment using HFC refrigerants be retrofitted to HFOs?
Yes, that's the short answer.
HFOs utilize or require POE oil, same as HFCs, right, Mark?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The transition from HFCs to HFOs is much simpler and straightforward versus going from 22 over to 404A or 22 to the HFCs. Because to your point, Mike, they already have POE, and that's what the HFOs use as well.
Right. So, and I'm curious, Mark, we're aware of 449A and R513. Are y'all looking at other alternative products in your research and development that we may see coming down the road here?
Yeah, well, and Alan talked a little bit about it. I think he did a great job of summarizing, overall where the industry is going to go. The products that we're talking about today, these HFOs, they have very low GWP, sub 1400. They are all designated as Class A1 non-flammable. In the, I'll say the back half of this decade, which ain't too far away, the industry will still stay with HFOs, but we're going to be moving into what's called A2Ls. These are mildly flammable HFO refrigerants. So these would be the counterparts to 448, 449, and 513. They would move from the A1 non-flammable classification to the A2 ultra-low GWP classification. And so they're the products that are going to be brought out over the next sort of 3 to 5 years as the entire industry makes a transition to using A2L. So yeah, those products are coming. They're sister products to the existing HFOs. But you'll be seeing those down the road as well.
Okay, thanks.
Mike, I would just add to that my comments about the capacity. So while from an oil standpoint, yes, you're fine, and the equipment will run with it. You just want to be sure that you understand which one you're changing to, and if there is a capacity concern. So that would be my only additional comment.
And there were some comments on the chat window about that. So yes, the potential change in capacity is a factor when looking at retrofits to HFOs. I would agree with that. So I had a couple other questions, but I actually would like to make some comments here at the end. I know that we've gone over our 1 hour limit here, so I'd like to say this, and I'm an older guy like some others on this in this meeting, and I was in my professional life for the CFC phase down and the Montreal Protocol, and at that time we were tearing our hair out and frustrated over that, and here we are again in a similar situation, and with that in mind, I'd like to remind everyone that we are all citizens of a global community first and before we are, refrigeration technicians or salespeople. And that as so, we have a responsibility to protect our planet. So this is a universal challenge. It's a global challenge, and maybe a way that we can come together as a race and get over some of our differences. I also look at it whenever we're confronted with challenges like this as a set of opportunities for us to learn and grow, to grow our businesses, and also to help in the global platform. So I think we can put a positive spin on it. And I also think that as industry partners, we can sort of lead the way with the charge here. So I wanted to just inject those comments.
Looks like we've got one more question that came in, Mike.
Yeah.
From Scott Lee.
I see it here. HP80, is there an alternative for HP80? More concerned with expansion valves and adding demand cooling. HP80 has been a alternative to the old R502 low temperature refrigerant. So with regard to retrofitting HP80, anybody want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I mean it can be retrofitted. I mean the short answer is you can retrofit to the 449 or 448. Yeah.
What about discharge temperature?
Right, but that's our.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alan.
So right now our alternative is.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
This is Scott. How's it going,
good.
guys?
Oh, yep.
So right now the alternative is 448 or 449.
Right.
But it's going to require expansion valve changes and the addition of demand cooling in most applications that we see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We do have a few customers that missed the boat on using 404 as an interim refrigerant for conversions in these older pieces. And we're talking rack stuff here. I mean, it's not like let's just change the condensing unit. So I'm just wondering if anybody's come up with anything that's not going to require valve changes. It's one of those is what it is things. If we have to do it, that's fine. It's just looking to save cost for the customer if possible. I didn't know if there's anything in the works.
Kind of a case.
I mean, it would depend.
God.
Yeah, it really will depend on the application and a case by case. It's hard to really say as an overall, check the box of everything. When you start to get into the HFCs and stuff, some of those, but the 448, 449 are our best answers for now. Now, the one chart I showed 455, 454, and 457 as some options that are out there. But they may not work in all the different applications.
Right,
So,
and I'm not familiar with them at all, Alan.
Yeah.
That one's new to me. So Michael might have to bring me up to speed there.
Okay. Well, we can, whatever you run into there, Scott, and I know you said that you weren't concerned about the oil change, but, HP80, we recommended alkybenzene oil. So.
Yeah, no, that's just the easy part to overcome.
I agree.
That's kind of a nothing thing there. So, but all right, I won't clog it up too much longer. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Good presentation.
All right. Thanks. Anything else from anybody out there?
Guys, feel free to unmute yourselves or ask your questions in the chat.
So I know we touched on 410A, but and I think this was answered by Mark, but we can expect 410A to be phased out. Where are we with replacement refrigerants for 410?
So, Mike, you'll start to see them in the 2023, 2024 timeframe. I know Carrier has already announced their 410A replacement. It's the product 454B. I think Daikin has as well, via Goodman. But I suspect in the first half, certainly within 2021, most of the major OEMs will be announcing their 410A replacement that will be brought to the market in that sort of 2023, 2024 timeframe. That's not to say that there's two years left on 410A. You'll see equipment being sold side by side, the 410A replacement as well as 410A. And I would tell folks now, if you need to replace a 22 system, put a 410A system in, right? Because the service gas will be around for the next 15, 20 years. But you will start to see the replacements, the 410A replacements, come to market in that 2023, 2024 timeframe.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
I would remind that when we all think about retrofit, that we are all very careful to never mix refrigerants. Many of these refrigerants are already compounds, and mixing them really creates challenges. So that really needs to be avoided. And that's all I have. It looks like the chat window has quieted down a little bit. Anybody else have any questions before we wrap this up?
Just saw a comment from Daniel come in.
Yeah, he's referring to Dalton's law of partial pressures, and he's exactly right about that. Pretty hard to find a pressure temperature chart that's going to apply to mixed refrigerants, so let's be careful there. Okay, so just in wrap, I want to say a big thank you to all our customers that tuned in for this today. I would say that we will be having future Ask the Experts training programs to give you further updates as things move forward. Also, there is other subject matter, like Alan referred to, which is AWEF and the DOE regulations. We have talked about those regulations in previous Ask the Experts meetings. I think this virtual format is great. It's very efficient for everyone. Another big thank you to our presenters today, Mark, Alan, and Sajad, for taking the time out of your busy days to be here with us, and thanks for all your support all the time. That's what I have. I hope everyone have a great day, that you stay safe and healthy, and that you also have a great holiday season. Thank you.